What is up? What is up, YouTube? Arrogant rookie cop, arrogant rookie officer challenges a black judge authority. What happened next stuns everyone. What makes it so bad? It stuns everyone, including her. Golly. Hey, this is part 2 right here. Y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Don't forget, leave in the comments if you prefer to break them up. If you didn't see part 1, go back and see part 1. Maybe we probably attracting more people to watch. You know, they come here first by accident or through the feed, right? And then all of a sudden, like, oh, well, let me start from the beginning of the story. Then they go back and watch that video and this one. So we might be attracting more people. We learning as we go. You know what I'm saying? I'm just keeping it real with people. I try my best to keep it real. Don't y'all want somebody on this YouTube to 100% try to keep things real with you, no matter what? Or you want me to be one of these crooked cops? People talk about Uncle Mike, man, like I care, right? Yeah. So, and I ain't gonna talk about them. Oops. What'd I do, y'all? I done hit a button. Something started. We supposed to be over here. How about that? So without any further ado, y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Let me know if y'all don't mind or if you do mind splitting it up to a part 1 and part 2. Let's check it out. Here we go.
I'm appointing a special master to oversee this investigation. Every case involving corrupted evidence will be reviewed. Every officer named in Captain Drake's testimony will be investigated, and every victim of this systemic abuse will have their day in court. He turned to where Savannah sat, looking lost, in her now wrinkled uniform.
Wrinkled.
Officer Mitchell, while you are not solely responsible for this institutional failure, you are not absolved of your actions. I'm ordering your immediate suspension pending a full review of your conduct. Additionally, you will participate in the investigation, sharing everything you know about these practices. Savannah nodded numbly, understanding that her career in law enforcement was effectively over. As for Mr. Washington's case, Carter continued, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Williams, you may file your civil suit at your convenience. The evidence presented here will be preserved for those proceedings. As the judge prepared to adjourn, Savannah suddenly stood. Your Honor, may I say something? Carter studied her for a moment before nodding. Briefly. Savannah turned to face the Washington family. Her voice trembled but grew stronger as she spoke. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to Mr. Washington, but for everything I represented. I thought authority meant never having to question. Yourself. I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that mistake. Judge Carter let her words hang in the air before making his final statement. This court is adjourned until Monday morning, when we'll begin examining the full scope of this misconduct. I remind everyone present that this investigation is ongoing, and all evidence is to be preserved. As people filed out of the courtroom, Savannah remained standing, watching as Darnell and his family left together, Michelle's words echoing in her mind. Every Thursday, she thought, understanding finally the true weight of what she'd done, not just to one family, but to countless others whose stories were only now coming to light. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Judge Carter watched from his chamber window as reporters gathered, knowing that tomorrow's headlines would tell only part of the story. The real work, the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust and accountability, was just beginning. Rain drummed against the windows of the precinct's records room as Savannah hunched over a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The clock on the wall showed 2:17 a.m., but she barely noticed. She'd been here for hours, diving deep into public records, news archives, and any database she could access. Her target, Judge Marcus Carter. Her desperation had driven her here after 3 sleepless nights. The investigation was destroying everything she'd built, everything she believed in. But if she could find something, anything, to discredit the judge. A news article from 35 years ago caught her attention. The headline made her pause. Local teen cleared after 3 months in detention. The grainy photograph showed a much younger Marcus Carter being embraced by his parents outside a courthouse. Savannah leaned closer, reading intently. According to the article, 17-year-old Marcus Carter had been wrongfully arrested for a convenience store robbery. Despite multiple witnesses placing him at a school event during the crime, he'd spent 3 months in juvenile detention before being cleared. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kevin Nash, a journalist she'd contacted earlier. Got your message. Meet me at Riverside Diner in 20? Savannah glanced at the time, then back at the article. On my way, she typed back. The diner was nearly empty when she arrived, the fluorescent lights harsh against the rain-streaked windows. Nash sat in a corner booth, laptop open, coffee cooling beside him. He was younger than she expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, hungry for his first big story. Officer Mitchell, he greeted her, eyes bright with anticipation. You said you had something on Judge Carter. Savannah slid into the booth, pushing a thumb drive across the table. His juvenile record was sealed, but I found newspaper coverage. Did you know he was arrested as a teenager? Nash's fingers hovered over his laptop keys. That's public record. What makes it newsworthy? Think about it, Savannah pressed. A judge who was wrongfully arrested as a teen, now presiding over cases involving police misconduct. How can he be impartial? You think he's biased against law enforcement because of his past? I think the public deserves to know about potential conflicts of interest. The words felt rehearsed, hollow. Nash was already skimming through the files. This is interesting, but it's thin. We'd need more to make it a story.
Oh my goodness.
What if I told you there were rumors about his time in juvenile detention? Things that didn't make it into the official record? Like what? Savannah hesitated. The next words would cross a line, and she knew it. I heard he might have been involved in some violence while he was inside. Nothing proven, but... Nash's expression shifted subtly. That's a serious allegation. Any evidence? Not yet. But if you start digging... You're asking me to imply a sitting judge has a violent past based on unsubstantiated rumors? Nash closed his laptop. Officer Mitchell, I may be new, but I'm not stupid. This feels like a hit piece. The public has a right to the truth, Nash cut her off, not to manufactured scandals. He stood, gathering his things. For what it's worth, I hope you find a better way through this. Savannah watched him leave, the rejection stinging more than she expected. But she wasn't done. She had other contacts, other journalists who might be more willing to run with the story. By morning, she'd made 3 more calls. Each one ended similarly to her meeting with Nash. But her last contact, a blogger known for controversial takes on local politics, showed interest. Send me what you have, he said. No promises, but I might be able to work with this. Savannah emailed him the files from the precinct computer, adding her own anonymous source quotes about concerns over the judge's objectivity. Her hands shook as she hit send, knowing she was committing career suicide if she was caught. But she felt trapped, desperate for any way to undermine the investigation's credibility.
Hey guys, Uncle Mike here with big news. YouTube has changed my life, and now it's your turn. See, Uncle Mike was tired of being broke after every payday. So I decided to do something about it. So I invested over about $9,000 in YouTube courses and online coaching. Man, I was determined to change. But guess what? None of these systems gave me the one-on-one coaching that I needed. So I created my own YouTube course with the help that you need to make sure that you succeed. If you're ready to learn and you're not afraid to put in the work, you too can make a real change. Sign up now and Uncle Mike will send you the 4 videos that got me started. 100% free. Click the word more below and look for our YouTube growth system. That's our course. Now, let's get back to this video.
She didn't expect things to move so quickly. By noon, the blog post was live. Exclusive. Judge Carter's hidden past. Can we trust his judgment? The piece was sensational, implying dark undertones to Carter's juvenile detention stay and questioning whether his past had created a vendetta against law enforcement.
You know, that's interesting, to be honest. You're right. you got to judge. Don't get me wrong. Just hear me out. Just hear me out. You got to judge that his main purpose is to seek out if the police officer right or wrong. And he's a judge now, right? And he's doing a good job. Now, if a regular judge wasn't seeking this out, they would have never caught all this and probably just not, do all the cross-checking, right? But because his primary focus is to get these bad cops, which means that and all of them should be like that, to be honest. Yeah, all of them should be like that. This is my point I'm making, because if everybody is out to say this crooked cop, Your Honor, I did everything by the book, and this man is 100%. Well, why you arrest him? Well, my video cameras and everybody showed that he swung at me, a duck. Then he tried to kick me, so I swooped down, and then all that'll be on video, see? So he was resisting arrest. That's clear. Next, you know what I'm saying? Those type of things. But her word was just saying that, well, he was resisting arrest, or he was doing something, so I had to arrest him. But all the video footage showed that all the stuff she did was wrong. The police officers covered up stuff that was wrong. Let's go deeper and investigate what the police doing. That's all wrong. Everything is wrong, wrong, wrong. Every judge should do that. That's what I think. What y'all think, man? I think that him having problems about bad cops, if anything, shouldn't hurt his job. It should say this make him do his job better.
Judgment. The piece was sensational, implying dark undertones to Carter's juvenile detention stay and questioning whether his past had created a vendetta against law enforcement. The story spread through social media like wildfire, picking up embellishments. With each sharing, local news stations began calling the courthouse for comment. Protesters from police support groups gathered outside, demanding Carter recuse himself from the investigation. Judge Carter was in his chambers when Sarah Chen brought him the printouts of the growing scandal. He read them silently, his expression unreadable. "Should we issue a statement?" Sarah asked. "No need," Carter replied calmly. "Have the bailiff inform everyone that court will begin 30 minutes early tomorrow. And Sarah, make sure Officer Mitchell is notified." The next morning, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists filled the back rows, cameras ready.
There you go.
Savannah sat rigidly at the prosecution table,
trying
trying to ignore the knowing looks from her colleagues. Everyone seemed to suspect where the leaked information had originated. Judge Carter entered precisely at 8:30 a.m. The usual all-rise call felt charged with extra tension. "Be seated," Carter said, his voice carrying its usual measured authority. "Before we continue with our investigation, I'd like to address the recent media attention regarding my personal history." A rustle of anticipation went through the gallery. Savannah held her breath. 35 years ago, I was wrongfully arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I spent 3 months in juvenile detention before being exonerated. These facts are public record, though someone has recently tried to embellish them with unsupported allegations. He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. What isn't public record is what I learned during those 3 months. I learned how it feels to be powerless in a system that presumes guilt. I learned that authority without accountability is nothing but institutionalized bullying. And I learned that justice delayed is often justice denied. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Those lessons shaped my career choices. They're why I became a public defender before joining the bench. They're why I'm known for being thorough in examining evidence. And they're why I will not recuse myself from this investigation. His eyes found Savannah's. Someone hoped that by exposing my past, they would discredit this investigation. They failed to understand that my experience doesn't make me biased against law enforcement. It makes me uniquely qualified to recognize the difference between proper police work and abuse of power.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Savannah felt herself shrinking under his gaze, understanding too late the magnitude of her mistake.
In other words, this happened to me, and I don't want it to happen to nobody else. But you best believe if the police officers are right, because I mean, think about it. If the police is right and I done combed over this stuff with a fine comb and they are in tip-top tuned, they're in tune with everything is right, then, I mean, you proved your point. That's what a judge supposed to do. Instead of just throwing me some papers and say, well, Your Honor, the video, the system got corrupted and we don't have no video footage. All right, well, that ain't, they can't help that. This is like freak of nature type stuff. Come on, man.
For police work and abuse of power. Savannah felt herself shrinking under his gaze, understanding too late the magnitude of her mistake. Now, Carter continued, let's discuss how these sealed juvenile records were accessed and who provided them to certain media outlets. The IT manager, Phillips, was called to testify first. He detailed the unauthorized database searches made from the precinct's records room computer at 2:17 a.m. using Savannah's login credentials. Next came Kevin Nash, the young journalist, who testified about his meeting with Savannah at the diner. His testimony was followed by emails from other journalists she'd contacted, each one documenting her attempts to plant the story. Finally, the blogger who'd published the piece was called in. Under oath, he admitted to embellishing the story based on Savannah's suggestions, adding unsubstantiated claims about violence that she had hinted at, but never directly stated. As the evidence mounted, Savannah felt the last remnants of her professional reputation crumbling. She'd crossed a line, violated ethical boundaries, and for what? To discredit a judge whose only crime was seeking truth and accountability. During a brief recess, she found herself face-to-face with Judge Carter in a quiet corridor. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice carrying more sadness than anger. I thought if people questioned your objectivity." "You thought wrong," Carter cut her off. "Do you know what I remember most from my time in detention? Not the fear, not the isolation. I remember Officer James Wilson." "Who?" "The guard. Who noticed I was reading law books in the library. Instead of mocking me like the others, he brought me more books. Said if I was going to study law, I should understand all sides of it. He taught me that wearing a badge doesn't make someone good or bad. It's how they use the authority that comes with it." Savannah felt tears threatening. "I just wanted to protect my career." "No," Carter replied quietly. "You wanted to protect your illusions about what that career meant. There's a difference." When court resumed, Carter addressed the attempt to discredit him directly. "This court will not be swayed by attempts at character assassination. However, Officer Mitchell's actions in accessing sealed records and attempting to plant false stories show a disturbing pattern of ethical violations. This will be added to the ongoing investigation of her conduct." The rest of the day brought more revelations about departmental corruption, but Savannah barely heard them. She was lost in thought, remembering her own journey from idealistic academy graduate to someone who would try to destroy a man's reputation to protect a broken system. Late that afternoon, as the session was wrapping up, an elderly man entered the courtroom. Judge Carter's face showed rare surprise. "Officer Wilson," he said softly. James Wilson, now well into his 70s, smiled from the gallery. "Been following the case in the papers, Your Honor. Thought you might need a friendly face today." Carter's composure cracked slightly. "The court will recess for 15 minutes. In his chambers, Carter and Wilson shared a brief but emotional reunion. Savannah, watching through the doorway, finally understood what real authority looked like. It wasn't about power or control. It was about impact, about the ripples one person's actions could create across decades. When proceedings resumed, Wilson stayed in the gallery, a living reminder of how single acts of kindness or cruelty could shape lives forever. Judge Carter ended the day with a statement that would be quoted in news articles for weeks to come. 35. Years ago, I was a teenager in detention, convinced the system was irredeemably corrupt. One person showed me that within any system, no matter how flawed, There are people working for positive change. Today, we're not just investigating misconduct, we're creating an opportunity for positive change. How we use that opportunity will define us far more than any mistakes in our past. The words hit Savannah like a physical blow. She thought about Darnell Washington, about all the others whose lives she'd impacted. She'd tried to destroy a good man's reputation to protect her own, only to discover that his past made him not weaker, but stronger, more qualified to judge her actions and their consequences. As people filed out of the courtroom, Wilson stopped beside her. "You know," he said quietly, 35 years ago, I saw another young person letting fear and pride drive them to make bad choices. Want to know what I told him?" Savannah looked up, surprised. "What?" "That it's never too late to choose a different path. That one mistake, or even many mistakes, don't have to define your whole story." He glanced toward Carter's chambers. "He proved me right. Maybe you will too." The rain had stopped by the time Savannah left the courthouse. The setting sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the steps. She paused, looking back at the building where her attempts at deception had turned into a lesson about truth, justice, and the long arc of consequence. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus Williams, scheduling her deposition for the civil suit. Another step in the long process of accountability that lay ahead. But for the first time since the investigation began, she felt something besides fear and desperation. She felt hope. Not for escaping consequences, but for the possibility of redemption through truth. The pounding on Savannah Mitchell's door came at 6:15 a.m. She was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee, when she heard the authoritative voice, "FBI, open the door." Her hands trembled as she complied. 4 agents in dark jackets entered, their badges gleaming in the early morning light. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, presented the warrant. "Officer Savannah Mitchell, you're under arrest for tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law." As they led her out in handcuffs, Savannah noticed her neighbors watching from behind curtained windows. Her cruiser sat in the driveway. She wouldn't be driving it again. Across town, similar scenes played out at other addresses. Captain Drake, despite his immunity deal, was taken into custody for additional charges uncovered during the investigation. 3 training officers were arrested. Even the IT manager, Phillips, was brought in after evidence suggested he'd been more involved in the cover-up than he'd admitted. In his chambers, Judge Carter reviewed the federal arrest warrants. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, no relation to his clerk, sat across from him, explaining the scope of the federal investigation. "The evidence tampering wasn't isolated to your jurisdiction," she explained. "We've found similar patterns in departments across 3 states. Your case broke it open." Carter studied the files. "The River Creek connection?" "Exactly, officer. Mitchell's former department was the key. Once we started pulling those threads..." Chen spread out a diagram showing links between multiple police departments. "It's a network. They share techniques, technology, even personnel." "How long has this been under investigation?" 8 months. "We were building our case slowly until your investigation forced their hand. The blog post attempting to discredit you? That spooked some of our targets. They started making mistakes." A knock interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered, with urgent news. "Your Honor, federal agents just raided the precinct. They're seizing all the computer equipment and files." Carter nodded. "Make sure today's hearing is moved to the federal courthouse, and contact Mr. Williams, his civil me." Case just got much bigger. At the FBI field office, Savannah sat in an interrogation room, still trying to process the morning's events. The door opened, and the lead agent, she'd introduced herself as Special Agent Monica Torres, entered with a thick file. "Let's talk about River Creek," Torres said, taking a seat. "Specifically about what happened there before you transferred." Savannah's throat went dry. "I don't know what you mean." Torres opened the file, removing a photograph. It showed a younger Savannah with several River Creek officers. including a man Torres identified as Lieutenant James Cooper. Cooper's been running this network for years, Torres explained, identifying officers with the right mindset, training them in evidence manipulation, report fabrication, selective enforcement, then placing them in departments across the region. I never, Savannah started. Never what? Never knew about the network, or never thought you'd get caught. Torres laid out more photographs. We have everything, Officer Mitchell. The training sessions disguised as poker nights, the software used to corrupt video evidence, the database of preferred candidates for recruitment. Savannah stared at the evidence of a conspiracy she'd been part of without fully understanding its scope.
Yeah.
I thought it was just about protecting officers who were doing their job. Is that what you told yourself? Torres's voice was surprisingly gentle. That arresting people without cause, falsifying evidence, violating civil rights? That was just doing your job? In another interrogation room, Phillips was breaking down. They approached me right after I was hired, he confessed. Said if I wanted to keep my job, I needed to be a team player. It started small, just occasional video files that needed to disappear.
Right.
Then they wanted me to install their software. Captain Drake, despite his earlier immunity deal, found himself facing new federal charges. His attorney sat grim-faced as U.S. Attorney Chen outlined the evidence linking him to the larger conspiracy. Your immunity covered departmental misconduct, Chen explained. It doesn't extend to federal crimes. We have emails, financial records, travel documents, all showing your role in expanding this network. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as local media caught wind of the raids. Judge Carter's expanded investigation had transformed into something much larger. In the main courtroom, now packed with federal prosecutors, defense attorneys, and journalists, the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. U.S. Attorney Chen addressed the court. What began as an investigation into one officer's misconduct has exposed a systematic effort to subvert justice across multiple jurisdictions. This network identified and recruited officers who showed a willingness to abuse their authority. They provided tools and training for evidence manipulation, created cover stories for civil rights violations, and actively worked to discredit anyone who threatened to expose their activities. Darnell Washington and his family sat in the gallery, watching as their personal injury case transformed into a landmark civil rights prosecution. Marcus Williams had already filed motions to expand their lawsuit into a class action, representing dozens of victims across multiple jurisdictions. During a brief recess, Williams met with the Washingtons in a conference room. This changes everything, he explained. The federal investigation has uncovered evidence of a coordinated effort to violate civil rights. Your case helped expose it, but now we're looking at systematic abuse going back years. Patricia Washington gripped her son's hand. All those other families will finally have a chance at justice, Williams assured her. The FBI has been building this case for months. Judge Carter's investigation just helped them move faster. Back in the interrogation room, Savannah faced a decision. Agent Torres had laid out her options: cooperate fully and immediately, or face maximum federal charges. Why me? Savannah asked. I was just a rookie. You were their ideal recruit, Torres replied. Young, ambitious, already primed to view authority as absolute. They spotted you in River Creek, guided your transfer here, made sure you were trained by their people. You weren't just a rookie, you were an investment. The words hit Savannah like physical blows. Every choice she'd thought was hers had been carefully orchestrated. Her transfer, her training assignments, even her early solo patrol that led to Darnell's arrest. All planned.
Plus, you had a little animosity about yourself. You was out there ready to, I'm going to kick some butt. I'm not going to say racist. You was a little racist, but you was ready to, we going to win and you going to lose. You had that, oh man, abuse power type thing. It's already inside you.
And to cement her place in their system. I cooperate, she said slowly. I need to know something first. What? How many? Savannah's voice cracked. How many people did they hurt using officers like me? Torres opened another file. We've identified over 300 cases so far, across 15 departments. And those are just the ones we can prove.
Yeah.
Savannah thought about Darnell Washington, multiplied his experience by 300. The weight of it seemed to crush the air from her lungs. I'll tell you everything, she whispered. By late afternoon, Judge Carter's courtroom had been transformed into a command center for the federal investigation. U.S. Attorney Chen presented the preliminary findings. The network operated like a pyramid scheme for civil rights violations, she explained. Senior officers identified recruits who showed promising signs, excessive force complaints, racial profiling patterns, resistance to oversight. These recruits were mentored, trained in evidence manipulation, and eventually placed in positions to recruit others. Judge Carter listened intently as Chen detailed how the conspiracy spread. They created a shadow training program. Official records showed proper procedure, while select officers were taught how to falsify reports, manipulate body camera footage, and handle civilian complaints. They even had a scoring system. Officers earned points for successful arrests that wouldn't hold up under proper scrutiny. The afternoon brought a parade of cooperating witnesses. Phillips provided technical details about the software used to corrupt video evidence. Training officers described how they identified potential recruits. Even Captain Drake, facing federal charges despite his earlier deal, began sharing information about the network's hierarchy. But it was Savannah's testimony that captured everyone's attention. She described her recruitment in River Creek, the subtle way they tested her boundaries, the gradual normalization of misconduct. They never called it corruption, she explained, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. It was always about maintaining authority or supporting fellow officers. They made it seem noble, like we were protecting the thin blue line between order and chaos. As she spoke, Judge Carter noticed Darnell Washington and his family in the gallery. Their personal tragedy had sparked an investigation that would impact hundreds of lives. The judge made a note to acknowledge their role when he issued his final ruling. The day's most dramatic moment came when Agent Torres presented evidence linking the conspiracy to several high-profile cases of police misconduct in other cities. This wasn't just about individual officers, Torres testified. This was a coordinated effort to prevent accountability, to maintain systems of oppression under the guise of law enforcement. Savannah listened from the witness stand, each revelation adding to her understanding of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. The idealistic rookie who thought she was maintaining order had been a pawn in a much darker game. During the final hour, U.S. Attorney Chen outlined the next steps. We've secured search warrants for 23 additional locations. Federal agents are working with state prosecutors to review every case handled by identified network members. And we're establishing a task force to handle the expected flood of civil rights cases. Judge Carter addressed the courtroom before adjourning. What began in this court as an examination of one arrest has exposed a cancer in our justice system. The coming days will be difficult for everyone involved, but sunlight remains the best disinfectant. This court will continue working with federal authorities to ensure that every victim of this conspiracy receives justice. As federal marshals led the arrested officers away, Savannah caught a glimpse of Sergeant Thompson in the gallery. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw not condemnation, but a deep sadness. He'd tried to warn her, to guide her toward a different path, but the conspiracy's influence had been too strong. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps as U.S. Attorney Chen held a press conference. Cameras flashed as she announced the formation of a special joint task force to investigate police corruption. In his chambers, Judge Carter met privately with the Washington family and their attorney. Your strength in pursuing justice didn't just help your own case, he told them. You've given hope to hundreds of other families who suffered similar injustices. Darnell, who had remained quiet throughout much of the day's proceedings, finally spoke. What happens next? Justice, Carter replied simply. Slow but certain. Every case will be reviewed, every victim will be heard, and those responsible will face consequences for their actions. As evening fell, Savannah was returned to federal custody. In her holding cell, she thought about the road ahead. Cooperation would mean testifying against former colleagues, exposing more corruption, facing the consequences of her actions. But for the first time since her arrest, she felt something close to peace. Agent Torres visited her one last time before transfer. "Why did you agree to cooperate?" Torres asked. "You could have tried to bargain for a better deal," Savannah thought, about Michelle Washington's words in the courthouse bathroom, about Judge Carter's story of redemption, about the 300 lives impacted by the conspiracy. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "the only way to make things right is to tell the whole truth, no matter what it costs you." As her cell door closed, Savannah Mitchell, former officer, conspiracy member, and now key witness, began the long process of making amends. The system that had shaped her into a tool of oppression was crumbling, and in its ruins lay the possibility of real justice. The next morning's headlines would tell part of the story. Federal investigation uncovers multi-state police corruption network. But the real story, of justice delayed but not denied, of truth emerging from darkness, of redemption through accountability, was still being written, one testimony at a time. The federal courthouse's high-security courtroom buzzed with tension as Savannah Mitchell took the witness stand. 6 weeks had passed since the FBI raids, and she'd spent every day preparing for this moment, the start of federal prosecution against the police corruption network. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen approached the podium. "Ms. Mitchell, please tell the court about your first meeting with Lieutenant Cooper at River Creek." Savannah's voice was steady, her police uniform replaced by a simple gray suit. "It was after my third shift. He invited me to what he called a mentorship meeting at his house. There were other officers there, all carefully selected. What happened at these meetings? They started subtle, discussions about maintaining authority, protecting fellow officers. Then they introduced what they called practical techniques for handling difficult situations." "Could you be more specific?" Savannah took a deep breath. "They taught us how to write reports that would justify any action we took, how to describe a civilian's behavior to make them appear threatening, which words to use, which details to emphasize." In the gallery, Sergeant Thompson watched his former rookie outline the conspiracy's methodology. Each revelation highlighted how thoroughly they'd corrupted the basic principles of law enforcement. "These weren't just informal suggestions," Savannah continued. "They had actual training materials, templates for reports, lists of approved phrases, even sample scenarios we would practice." Chen displayed a document on the courtroom screens. "Is this one of those templates?" "Yes. See how it's structured? The civilian is always described as aggressive or non-compliant first. Then our actions are presented as responses to their behavior, never the other way around." Throughout the morning, Savannah detailed the network's operations. She described how Cooper and others identified potential recruits, how they tested loyalty through increasingly questionable assignments, how they created a parallel training system that twisted proper procedures into tools of oppression. During a brief recess, Judge Carter met with federal prosecutors in his chambers. Agent Torres spread out new evidence on his desk. "We've linked the network to similar operations in 12 states, she reported. "Same methods, same training materials, same pattern of evidence manipulation. They were building a nationwide system."
Wow.
Carter studied the documents. "How many officers involved?" "Conservative estimate, over 500, and those are just the active participants. There are probably twice as many who knew, but stayed quiet." The afternoon session brought Phillips to the stand. The former IT manager had turned state's evidence, providing technical details about the network's digital operations. "The software wasn't just for corrupting video," he explained. "It was designed to create plausible technical failures. If someone investigated, they'd find what looked like genuine file corruption or system errors." "Who provided this software?" Chen asked. "It came through Cooper. but it was developed by a private company called Blue Line Security Solutions. Phillips paused. A company owned by retired police officials from multiple departments. The revelation sent ripples through the courtroom. The conspiracy hadn't just corrupted active officers. It had created a profitable business model for continuing that corruption. As Phillips testified about technical details, Savannah sat with federal marshals in a secure room, watching on closed-circuit TV. Each piece of evidence showed her how small her role had been in a much larger machine. During her next session on the stand, Chen directed her attention to specific cases. "Tell us about Jeremy Torres," Chen prompted. Savannah's composure cracked slightly. 19 years old. I arrested him for suspicious behavior near a convenience store, the same store where I later arrested Darnell Washington. What happened to Mr. Torres? He spent 3 weeks in jail before the charges were dropped. Lost his job. His girlfriend was pregnant at the time. He missed their first ultrasound appointment because he was in custody. And was there any legitimate reason for his arrest? No. Savannah's voice caught. He was just there. But he fit the profile we were taught to target. Young, minority, in what they called a high-value enforcement zone. In the gallery, Marcus Williams sat with several other civil rights attorneys. They'd been compiling similar cases, building a massive class action lawsuit that would eventually include over 300 plaintiffs. The prosecution's case continued with testimony from Cooper's former secretary, who'd secretly documented years of suspicious meetings and conversations. They called it quality control, she testified. Every week, they'd review body camera footage from officers in multiple departments. Not to check for misconduct, to identify officers who showed potential for recruitment. They looked for specific behaviors, attitudes toward civilians, willingness to escalate situations. The evidence mounted. Financial records showing payments to Blue Line Security Solutions, training schedules disguised as routine departmental meetings, performance evaluations that rewarded aggressive enforcement while ignoring civilian complaints. During cross-examination, defense attorneys tried to paint Savannah as an opportunist, turning on her colleagues to save herself. But her testimony remained consistent, her remorse genuine. "Yes, I'm testifying in exchange for consideration in sentencing," she acknowledged. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because people were hurt, hundreds of people, and staying silent would make me complicit in every future abuse this system enables." As the day's session ended, Judge Carter made an unexpected announcement. "Tomorrow, this court will hear from those most affected by these actions. The prosecution will present testimony from citizens whose lives were impacted by the network's operations." The next morning, Jeremy Torres was the first to take the stand. Now 21, with a toddler daughter, he described how his wrongful arrest had derailed his life. "I lost my job at the warehouse," he testified. 3 weeks in jail, no communication with my employer. By the time I got out, they'd replaced me. My girlfriend's family wanted her to leave me. They thought there must have been a reason for my arrest. Even after the charges were dropped, people looked at me differently. One by one, victims shared their stories. A nurse who lost her license after a falsified drug arrest, a college student whose scholarship was revoked, a small business owner whose reputation was damaged by manufactured charges of disorderly conduct. Savannah forced herself to watch each testimony, to hear every detail of how the system she'd served had destroyed lives. During a break, she encountered Jeremy Torres in a courthouse hallway, accompanied by federal marshals. He studied her for a long moment. "You really didn't see us as people, did you?" "No," she admitted quietly. "We were taught to see threats, statistics, quotas. Never individuals with lives and families and dreams. And now? Now I see too clearly, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." The prosecution's case concluded with testimony from civil rights experts who outlined the broader social impact of targeted enforcement and systemic bias.
Dude, that's scary, man. That's scary when people have been trained to think that they doing right. they've been trained to think that they doing justice. Can you understand what they saying? Y'all cannot understand what's going on here. They done brainwashed this girl. And she swear to God, she got her stuff. She had her little clothes on. It's acting. I'm going to wait till we at the end, man. This is ridiculous. I thought I was doing my job. I just knew I was down. You know, I'm on the code. I'm going to protect the blue. Even the judge should be protecting the blue. Then they found out that the judge don't like the blue. We got to get him disbarred. I think every judge should not like to go fine comb. Fine comb, you got to go through everything. I don't know who lying, but we about to find out. You better be lucky I ain't no judge. You better be lucky I ain't running this world. Here we go, man.
Yes. They presented data showing how the network's operations had disproportionately affected minority communities, creating cycles of distrust and fear. In his closing argument, U.S. Attorney Chen addressed the bigger picture. This case isn't just about corrupt officers or manipulated evidence. It's about the deliberate perversion of justice itself. The defendants didn't just break the law, they systematically undermined the very principles of equal protection and due process. The jury's deliberations lasted 3 days. When they returned, the verdicts were unanimous. Guilty on all counts for Cooper and the other conspiracy leaders. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. For Savannah, the hardest moment came after the verdicts, when she met with Marcus Williams and his clients to formally apologize. "I know words aren't enough," she told them. "But I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'll work to repair the damage I helped cause." Williams nodded. "That work begins now. The civil case needs your testimony about specific incidents, policies, and patterns of behavior. It won't be easy." "I understand." Savannah squared her shoulders. "Whatever you need." The civil proceedings brought a different kind of reckoning. Where the criminal trial had focused on the conspiracy's leaders, the civil case exposed the daily impact of their policies. Savannah testified for weeks, detailing how seemingly routine police actions had been weaponized against innocent civilians. During a break in the civil proceedings, she met with her therapist, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a counselor specializing in law enforcement trauma. "How are you handling the testimony?" Reynolds asked. Savannah stared out the office window. "Every day, I learn about another life I helped destroy, another family traumatized, another community's trust shattered. And how are you processing that?" "I'm not sure I should be allowed to process it," Savannah admitted. "Maybe carrying this weight is part of making amends." "Punishment and redemption aren't the same thing," Reynolds reminded her. "You can acknowledge your guilt while still working toward healing, both for yourself and those you harmed." The civil case concluded with a landmark settlement. The departments involved agreed to massive reforms, including independent oversight, mandatory bias training, and a civilian review board with real authority. The class action plaintiffs received substantial compensation, though everyone acknowledged that money couldn't fully repair the damage done. Judge Carter presided over the final settlement hearing. His closing remarks would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "Today we've seen justice done in terms of legal remedy, but true justice requires more than verdicts and settlements. It requires a fundamental change in how we view authority, accountability, and human dignity. The officers involved in this conspiracy didn't start their careers intending to become corrupt. They were gradually led down that path by a system that prioritized power over service, control over protection. As we implement these reforms, we must remember that the badge is not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of public trust." In the aftermath, Savannah began working with police reform advocates, sharing her experiences to help identify and prevent similar corruption.
Now I'm glad of that.
She spoke at academy training sessions, her story serving as a powerful warning about the seductive nature of unchecked authority. 1 year after the initial investigation, she was invited to speak at a community reconciliation forum. The audience included many of her former victims, including Darnell Washington and his family. "I won't ask for forgiveness," she told them. "What I did, what we all did, caused harm that can never be fully undone. Instead, I ask for the opportunity to help prevent others from suffering the same injustice. Every
There you
day,
go.
I work with departments and training programs to recognize and stop the patterns that enabled our abuse of power. Michelle Washington, who still couldn't bring herself to wait outside her office, asked the hardest question. How do we know this won't happen again?
You don't.
Because now we know what to look for, Savannah replied. The subtle ways authority can be corrupted. The small compromises that lead to bigger ones. The importance of true accountability. But most importantly, because people like your brother had the courage to stand up and demand justice, no matter the cost. Darnell, who had finally resumed his Thursday lunches with Michelle, at a different location, added his perspective. The system didn't fail just because of corrupt officers. It failed because good people stayed silent. Change happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. The forum ended with the announcement of a new civilian oversight committee, led by community members and reform advocates. Sergeant Thompson, who had retired from the force to focus on police reform, served as a technical advisor. As the anniversary of Judge Carter's initial ruling approached, the changes were evident. Body camera footage was automatically uploaded to secure, independent servers. Civilian complaints were investigated by an outside agency. Training programs emphasized de-escalation and community engagement. But the most significant change was invisible, a shift in how authority was viewed and exercised. Officers learned to see their power not as a right, but as a responsibility. Communities began to cautiously rebuild trust with law enforcement. Savannah's sentencing, delayed by her cooperation and testimony, finally arrived. She stood before Judge Carter one last time, having helped dismantle the corrupt system she'd once served. Carter reviewed her contributions to the investigation before speaking. Ms. Mitchell, your actions caused real harm to real people. No amount of cooperation can erase that fact. However, your efforts to expose and reform the system that enabled that harm have been substantial. This court sentences you to 5 years, with 3 years suspended, plus 5 years of supervised release. During that time, you will continue your work with reform advocates and training programs. As she was led away to begin her sentence, Savannah caught a glimpse of Officer James Wilson in the gallery, the man who had once shown Judge Carter a different path. He nodded slightly, acknowledging that even in the darkness of corruption, there was always a chance for light to break through. The story of one rookie officer's journey from blind authority to conscious accountability became part of a larger narrative about justice, reform, and the ongoing work of building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. It wasn't a happy ending. There was too much damage for that. But it was something equally important. A new beginning.
Oh my God, where do I begin? There is no, you got crooked cops, right? But what if a cop that's crooked think he's doing right? He's been trained to be crooked. And I ain't talking about race. I mean, it's sure is funny how everybody's so damn smart. Dummies. Everybody think they so smart where you can't get the one thing right. Your goal in life should be to help people. That's it. Not help black people, not help poor people, not help rich people, not help people that's in charge. All people. If you put that one thing first, your life will be 100% better. Sitting here going to arrest somebody just because they in front of a store. I got proper calls. What are you doing? I'm waiting on my sister. Let me see some ID. You know you don't have to show ID. You ain't done nothing. But that right there is enough to bring conflict right there. Or you ain't gonna show me ID? I'm the police. I'm authority. Now you start fighting a little bit, and now you're resisting arrest. Yeah, I mean, what in the world? Now you this is on your mind, your family seeing you being slammed in the back of the car and all this stupid stuff. But you'll have your day in court after all this messed up problems that's happened, man. Look here. But I'm glad. See how deep that thing was? They even had software to cover up this stuff. It glitches in the cameras and everything. This stuff is real, y'all. They training these police officers. You see the movie Colors? Where he tried to train the rookie. Golly, look here, man. I'm going to get on up out of here, man. Y'all let me know part 1, part 2. Let me know if you check out both parts. I'm going to get on up out of here. Hey, y'all take it light, take it slow. Tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.